Okay, hey, welcome to part two of our fish unit here. Last part, all we did was basically introduce the different classes of vertebrates and explain how there's three classes of fish. Today we're going to talk about those three classes, then get into a little bit of the anatomy and physiology within those classes there. The first one we're going to start with maybe one of the more primitive uh, classes, and those are the jawless fish. Okay, lampreys would be the best example of those. Here we have a look at a couple lampreys there. They are obviously don't have a jaw. They're a sucker, and they prey upon other fish, and they can be quite invasive. Especially some are coming into the Great Lakes and those kind of areas there. There's actually a video in the notes that talks about how they're controlling the sea lamprey population by sterilizing some of them as they're going. And it's an interesting video you should check out. So that's the first class of fish. Second class would be the cartilaginous fish. Whoops, we're not going to watch that together though. The cartilaginous fish, all right. Sharks are the big ones in this category. Everyone's heard that, sharks don't have any bones. Well, they do. They're just made out of cartilage instead of calcium phosphorus like ours are. Fitting into this category would also be different rays. And then one that be found here in Minnesota would be sturgeons are in the cartilaginous fish category. The majority of the fish that we are going to talk about, though, fall into this ray fin or this bony fish category. And you can see, I like this chart because this chart is showing over time and number of families. So you see like the jawless fish here over time, there actually used to be quite a few more, but now there's just a couple families that are left. The cartilaginous fish are here, and they actually kind of this bottleneck event, but there's starting to be some more variety coming up. And then there's the ray fin fishes at the end of the Permian period that really started to explode and balloon out. We do have a little bit of this lobe fin that we're not going to really get into. And then, spoiler alert, the rest of us came from over here in a special branch of this fish family, but that's much later. We'll be talking about that. Here's that Devonian era, the age of the fishes that we were talking about last lecture there. With fish, we're going to start into some of the basic anatomy. And the first is how their circulatory system works or their cardiovascular system. So their heart has two chambers to it, essentially just has a top and a bottom. Yours and mine have four chambers. Okay, we have a top, bottom, and a right and left within there. But fish just have the two chambers there. So blood arrives in the atrium and gets pumped out of the ventricle. If we look, we zoom out a little bit, blood from the body arrives here, goes to the ventricle. It then is pumped to the gills. The gills is where that oxygen and carbon dioxide get exchanged. And then it gets pumped back to the rest of the body. So fish have a two-chambered heart. Blood is passed over the gills where it picks up oxygen. And so it just is one large loop around their body. That's going to be an important thing as we talk about other classes of vertebrates and the different circulatory systems that they have. So two chambers, but just one loop going throughout their entire body there. Here is actually, I'm going to show this. Here is actually a look at a fish heart. Still pumping blood after it's been filleted out. Here you can see the atrium's on top. The ventricle is down below here. And it just has the two chambers there that are still pumping. If you take anatomy and physiology with me someday, we'll talk about what on earth is going on there and why it is still able to pump, even though it's no longer in the body. You actually don't need your brain at all to pump your heart, thanks to some special pacemaker cells in there. So anyway, back to the heart. I like this diagram a lot. This kind of shows the complexity in cardiovascular systems that we're going to be talking about eventually. So fish are on the left, just two chambers, goes to the gills, goes to the body, comes back to the heart. The rest of the vertebrates, in particular the land vertebrates here, have multiple chambers and they have two loops, all right? And that's because a need for blood pressure. And we'll get into what that means, but a good look at that two-chamber, one-loop system. respiration. Fish do breathe oxygen. Okay, we always think that they breathe water instead. Well, no, they breathe oxygen. Their only difference is that they have gills that sift or filter the oxygen out of the water. Okay, when we're talking about trout streams, we talk about dissolved oxygen is very important. And that's because fish are not breathing water itself. It is just using its gills to pull the oxygen out of the water as it's going, not splitting the water molecules and the hydrogen and oxygen, but just any oxygen that's dissolved in that water. Many fish have gill covers called operculums. We'll get into that later on. And then actually some fish do have some specialized organs that act as lungs. So not all fish have the same gill structures as we're going. Here's a look at those gills. They're really, evolved to have high amounts of surface area, each one, lots of blood vessels to facilitate that carbon dioxide to oxygen exchange there. Another unique feature, and I have this right next to the respiratory system as well, because it's not similar, but I always put it together. And this is a swim bladder or an air bladder. This is something that other vertebrates don't have, and that is a structure that they can inflate and deflate in order to set their buoyancy. So it's just like a submarine, or when you exhale all of the air out of your lungs in the pool and sink to the bottom, they can inflate and deflate this sac to determine what level of water they're going to stay at. So that's how fish can stay toward the surface, or they can stay down deep without expending any energy, as they have this swim bladder in there. I believe lastly for today, we have excretion. So we all have excretory systems. A big thing with fish is that since they are always in the water, they have to have some specialized systems that help maintain their water balance. Us that live on land, we have this thing called skin that's waterproof, that maintains water, that keeps the water inside us. Fish don't have it so easy. So they really need to maintain that internal water balance, another form of homeostasis. If you're a saltwater fish, they tend to lose water over time. So they have some specialized pumps and different things to help retain water. And freshwater fish tend to gain too much water, which is also not great. So they have some specialized cells and whatnot to get rid of that. And that's also why if you are raising fish, fish can't just go back and forth from freshwater to saltwater. They have different systems to deal with that. Salmon are a species that can do both. But when salmon do achieve both, it ultimately ends in their death there. So there are our fish notes, part 2.